Joining me now is NBC News senior White House correspondent Garrett Haake, Washington Post White House reporter Jacqueline Alemany, and Boston Globe columnist Kimberly Atkins-Storr. She's also the co-host of the Sisters-in-Law podcast, Apt Right Now. Garrett, start with you. What more do we know about this major resignation at the Social Security Agency, and what kind of pressure is being put on the White House now in response?
Well, Ali, this comes as we've seen similar dramas play out at other agencies where what's happening is staffers who are affiliated with DOJ are onboarding at these different agencies, becoming essentially employees of the Social Security Administration or the IRS, what have you, and then attempting to gain access to some of these sensitive systems that contain a lot of data about you and me and taxpayers and, benefit recipients all around the country. They have received varying degrees of pushback around the government, particularly as they've approached more of these sensitive systems that, of course, control more of where the federal government's money goes. We've heard a lot of talk from folks in and around the administration about the reason they are pursuing these tactics. Listen to some of what we heard just the last few days.
They haven't dug into the books yet, but they suspect that there are tens of millions of deceased people who are receiving fraudulent Social Security payments.
You know, there's crazy things like just cursory examination of Social Security, and we've got people in there that are 150 years old. Now, do you know anyone who's 150? I don't.
I don't either, Ali, but a deeper dive into the books would have shown, as it showed the last people to do it, the Inspector General's office, who completed an audit just last year, that while there are dead people on the Social Security rolls, they are not receiving tens of millions of dollars in payouts. In fact, the total fraud estimated across the last 8 years or so from the Social Security Agency is less than 1%. So some of this, there is certainly money coming out of these systems that needs to be fixed. I think this is something that the administration says DOJ is in there looking for, but they are sort of putting out on the table these claims about enormous fraud before finding the evidence to support it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we're actually going to talk to someone who, until recently, was the head of the Social Security Administration. We'll ask him about those exact claims from the White House. But Jackie, to you, these probationary firings are going to have a major impact on the next generation of government employees. Talk about what's being lost by letting go tens of thousands of recent recruits from these key roles.
Yeah, Ali, I think what we're losing here is a lot of institutional knowledge about the way that our government, as it has in the past, worked, and potentially going forward, especially if you look at the disincentives now to apply to any sort of federal jobs and the future jobs that are being eliminated here. Now, some of these probationary employees have recently been hired and brought in to the federal government in expanded offices and workplaces that were created under the Biden administration. But some of these probationary employees are people who have simply potentially switched agencies or have recently switched roles and have only been in that role for a certain amount of time, but have potentially served in the federal government for decades on end. It's going to severely impact the way, again, that these agencies are able to do business on a day-to-day basis, not to mention sort of the chaos that is currently happening and unfolding in these agencies at this very moment and affecting and impacting the ability for people to do their jobs and keep things going. There's also the fact that these DOJ cuts have been quite sweeping and not the most targeted, which has caused some of these firings to be undone once DOJ officials have realized that actually some of these jobs have been really essential. And that has spanned, again, across government agencies. We also know that the firings are going to continue past these probationary lists of employees. My colleagues obtained documents from DOJ associates this weekend that showed that they're not only going to move past just targeting DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, but now going even as far as expanding to offices that litigate employment discrimination and issues that are sort of adjacent to DEI initiatives.
Really important and impactful reporting there. And then, Kim, what we thought was at the center of all of this was Elon Musk. But we've apparently found out through the Trump administration telling a court that Elon Musk is actually not the head of Doge. He's just an advisor here. We should note the president is going to be on Fox News tonight, along with Musk. But what is the impact of this new filing saying he's not actually the guy in charge? And also, why has he been acting like the guy in charge all this time then?
Well, I think it's evidence that the White House is finally understanding the constitutional problem that they have with Elon Musk. The Constitution requires that anybody who is in charge of a federal agency like this be Senate confirmed, and Elon Musk was not. So now they're attempting to say, no, he is merely a White House senior advisor. He doesn't really have any role here. This goes against everything that Elon Musk himself has said, against many things that President Trump himself has said, and Elon Musk's own Twitter feed, where he proclaims that he is the one, quote unquote, deleting folks in these agencies. But this will be important once you get to a court, once a court starts looking into these challenges, into those actions, because if he's acting in a way that is extra constitutional, this is supposed to be a role set up for Congress. Congress passed a law as to how this is supposed to happen, and he's flouting it. But if he's working from the White House and still doing this work, that's unconstitutional as well. So which way is he breaking the Constitution? The White House seems to still be trying to figure that out.
Garrett, wasn't it the prevailing view that Musk was in charge of this? Where did this come from?
Himself during the transition, sort of appointing Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy to lead this Doge effort. But I think at the end of the day, it's important to remember that under whatever name, these are administration policies being conducted by the Trump administration. And so Elon Musk, to use a space term, has been something of a useful heat shield for the administration to the degree we've all been focused on him as the person behind this. To Kimberly's point, at the end of the day, it is only the federal government that can fire these federal employees. That ultimately lands at the president's desk, not Elon Musk's.
An important point there from Garrett Haake at the White House. Jackie Alamany and Kimberly Atkins-Stohr, thank you for joining us.